everyone. My name is Brent Bailey, and I work for StarFish Medical as one of the senior systems engineers. What I sort of want to talk about is the how we do design. And so there's the traditional design approach, which is sort of based on the 1950s, on how we, the whole idea behind it is how to quickly and efficiently get from concept to launch. So, and with concept, there will be, sorry, I'm just going to move my screen here. With concept, there's going to be some external market research that's done. We'll interview our current customers. We'll take a look at what our competitors are doing, and really we'll decide on what the new features we are going to want to develop. And that will sort of go into a market requirements document where then the project and program management team will estimate schedule and cost, and the engineering starts at this point. And you'll go to an alpha build to ensure that the whole thing integrates correctly, and then from that you'll basically build a beta model, and that will be used for V&V. It's sort of a pre-production. In medical device, a lot of times that will go for regulatory submission. And then we're going to go to launch. So the marketing team is really going to have to actually start working on developing all their promotional material. The sales team will sort of align on how they're going to do the sales, and production will commence. But there's a problem here. And that's what if you don't know the market that you're going into? And really, companies don't fail because they don't have product. They fail because they don't have customers. So really trying to change the problem to involve what do the customers need instead of how to efficiently develop a product. And that's because there's really two different types of markets. One is a sustaining market where the company has been there for a long time. They have a large customer base. They know exactly what the market wants and expects. The other is more of a startup market where it's going to be disruptive. What you're trying to do as a startup is disrupt the market by either creating a new market or resegmenting some part of that market to try and get into there. If you're playing with large billion-dollar companies and you're a startup, you need to find a way to get that foothold in, and that's trying to disrupt that market to do that. And so I work at StarFish Medical, and we basically, that's our bread and butter. We help people who come to us with these brilliant new technologies, these new innovations, and get them from that sort of concept part all the way to a final product. So, and the next thing I'm going to look at, which is sort of probably most people have seen this, it's in the COSI handbook, it's in the NASA Systems Engineering Handbook, it's the life cycle cost. And one of the things that we really want to sort of keep in mind is this green arrow that's moving upwards to the right. And that's, the cost of making a pivot. So one of the things that we're trying to do is if we, startups are very resource constrained. They don't necessarily have a lot of money. They don't necessarily have a lot of people. They can't do everything. And so being able to pivot early is critical. So really, for startups, and just generally for everyone, is we want to make those pivots as early as possible, right down in the concept and design phase. If we make them later on, that puts the whole project at risk. So the whole idea is, how do we actually make sure that when we pivot, we're going to pivot early? And that takes us to the whole idea of a lean startup. So the lean startup idea is really, it's about learning instead of execution. And it's trying to find out what the customer's problems are. And really, do the customers think that those problems are significant enough that they want a solution for them? And sort of the main tenet of the lean startup approach, and you've probably heard this before, is what is known as a minimum viable product. And in a lot of ways, the minimum viable product is really just taking the scientific method and then applying it to your customers. And one of the things, so when they came up with the lean startup approach, this is how they called a product: a version of a new product which allows a team to collect the maximum amount of validated learnings about customers with the least effort. So there's a couple of things to note there. It's about learning. It's not about sales. The product itself doesn't necessarily have to be a saleable product. It's really trying to find some way to actually learn what you need so that when you actually get your product to market, it will succeed. And really, it's having an idea or a hypothesis, and you can build. So you go around the circle and you build something to test that idea, and that is your MVP. And you use that MVP and you bring it back to your stakeholders and your customers, and you measure their reaction. And from that, we develop data that we use so that we can learn, which will lead to more ideas. So it's a cyclical process. It's not supposed to be, you just go around it once and it's done. You're trying to do it so that you get to the best ideas possible. And very much like doing sort of requirements management and V&V work, you really want to state what the test is. So you state, I have a hypothesis at the start. And with that hypothesis, what do I want to do? How am I going to test that hypothesis? And what am I going to measure when I do that test? And what is the criteria for me to say that that hypothesis is true or false? So this is really done before we actually even get into the whole MVP, like building the MVP. We're actually designing the test for it. And the difference, though, from V&V work and this is that we're here to capture learnings. So the fact that it didn't work, the fact that our hypothesis was wrong is not a problem. It's actually the whole point. The whole point is to figure out where we're wrong early enough that we can actually make a pivot and we can change our design. We can make something that is what they want, is going to provide the value that they want. So, we restate our hypothesis, we state what we've observed, we take all of that data and we'll bring it into a learning, and then really, what are we going to do next? Was the hypothesis validated or invalidated? Does it need further investigation? Do we want to, does it lead to a new hypothesis that we're going to want to test that? And what I'm trying to do is bring this all into the Capella framework as more of a, and hopefully by the end of this talk, you'll agree that it could actually work. So we're all sort of used to the levels in Capella that are at the right: the operational analysis, the system needs analysis, the logical and the physical architecture. In this drawing, though, there's the stuff at the left, the needs understanding, and the solution architecture design. And really, I'm going to more break my some of the stuff that I do to look at those sorts of parts of it. And if we are to look at this, the needs understanding, that's really at the concept level, as per this Nkosi slide, where in a lot of ways, the operational analysis will basically end with a mission concept review. And the system needs and analysis will sort of, the output of that is a system requirements review. So that's sort of where those things, at least in my head, fit. And as if we can keep as many of those pivots down at this level, right? Because we can see that a pivot in a design phase is 3 to 6 times more. In the development phase is 20 to 100 times. And once you get into production, it's 500 to 1,000 times. So keeping all of these pivots is, in the concepts phase will really help. And to do this, I use what is known as a value proposition canvas. A company called Strategizer came up with this tool, and there is a book called The Value Proposition Design, and I highly recommend it. So if you are interested in what I'm talking about here, definitely pick it up. It is a great reference tool. And what the value proposition canvas is just a really a graphical representation of how are we going to provide value to our customers. And it, as you can see, it's broken up into two. The right side is the customer profile side, and that sort of goes into the needs that we were understanding the needs section, or sorry, that goes into the operational analysis side of things, and the value proposition side sort of fits more into the system needs side. So let's get into operational analysis then. So the first thing that we're going to do is, for each of our stakeholders, we're going to create a canvas. And what we're trying to do is understand what those stakeholders are trying to get done. What jobs do they have? And some of them may be functional, which sort of really goes towards what an operational capability is in Capella. But some of them may be social, and some of them may be personal. And if you're in the aerospace business or something, maybe the social and personal aren't as important. But for a company like Apple, the social, which is sort of how people see you, is very important. That's a lot of what their market is. And for something like Ben & Jerry's ice cream, what's the job of Ben & Jerry's ice cream? It's personal. It's how you feel about yourself. How does it make you feel? So we don't want to just constrain ourselves to the functional side of things. We also want to look at how the larger picture here. And those functional parts sort of relate back to, as I said, our operational capabilities. Now, if you're in a startup and you're working on something, we don't really have an operational capability that we can sort of go to. The device hasn't been created yet. There's no market. So we really look for analogous devices and try and take a look at what other companies, what other devices do those users use that may be similar to what we're proposing and get an understanding of where the limitations of those devices are. And so basically what the pains are and what do they really like about the device. So what the gains are. And sort of we'll create our, a sequence diagram, and we'll put in those pains and gains. So what is a pain? Well, one way to put it would be it's what keeps them up at night. What does bad look like? And, what are the undesirable outcomes when they're doing this? When things go wrong, what is it that they worry about? What are the obstacles? What are the risks that they see? And we really want to make these quantitative. It takes over 10 minutes to perform a scan. Actually says a lot. That we can work with that. If we just say it takes too long to do a scan, too long is very subjective. So it's very similar to doing requirements, but it's a bit looser. And what are the gains? Well, if the pains are what keeps them up at night, the gains are what do they dream about? What does good look like? When everything goes right, what is that? And really some of the gains that they're going to be looking at are, what do they really need? What's the gains that are required? What do they just expect because other people are doing them? Or they're, they think that would be something that would come out of doing this process. And then what are sort of the desired ones? What are the things that are, if everything went right, if I had the perfect thing, it would do this. And trying to get to understand what those things are. And what we want to do now is go and rank them. So I've ranked the jobs from most important to least important. And I've ranked the pains from most painful to sort of just a mild annoyance, and the gains from absolutely want to have no matter what to maybe that would be good. And we want to do this for all our stakeholders, the business stakeholders, and also sort of in the medical side of things, the patients and the users, the end users of the device. We may think it's this is what they need, and everyone in our engineering team thinks that this is the problems that they're having, but that doesn't matter. What really matters is to actually go out and talk to them and find out what these end users and actually need. And so that's where no facts exist inside of the building, only opinions. Facts exist outside. You need to actually get out there and talk. And one of the things that we like to do is a storyboard. So we take our analogous device and we create a storyboard of what it is, and we base it on these sequence diagrams that we have in functional chains, and we sort of work through okay, this is going to be how a patient arrives into a hospital or something, so that we can actually sort of get an idea. Then our second MVP is actually taking this to the actual end users. And we're going to look, we're going to do an interview with them. And generally, actually, people will give you probably 20 to 30 minutes of their time to talk about what problems they have. And so you want to really also sort of structure your interview, get a script written. And what you're really trying to do with all your questions is understand what the problems, you should have it should be really linked to a hypothesis. And what are the problems that they are? What is it that you're trying to validate here? And Some of it may be demographics, getting an understanding of who they are, who's your customer base in general. The rankings that we did before, is that correct? We want to understand what do they see as their main problems. We want to walk through that storyboard. Is there differences in different locations that we wouldn't have known about? So we want to actually get and talk to these people and see, or are we missing things there? And then we have some open-ended questions. And really the idea behind the open-ended questions are, is there problems that they're having that we don't know about? And trying to figure out, what is it that you're actually trying to do? And the whole thing about the problem interview is we don't want to talk about the solution. We're just focusing in on what their problems are and what they consider the most important part of those. The other thing is what's the size of the population that you wanted to actually talk to? And that really goes back to, in some ways, a V&V question. What is the confidence level that you're looking for? What is the reliability that you want in that data that you have? And you can sort of go from there to determine, okay, this is how many people I should talk to. And from that, you get problem validation. So problem validation is, what I'm saying is, we've actually talked to the users and they say these are their problems. We've actually validated that these are their problems. This isn't validation of the device or validation of the product. This is validation of the problem with respect to the users. They have that problem. And then we can actually move into the system analysis side of things. And one of the things that I tell my team is, we want to make this system analysis agnostic. So I tell them, you have pixie dust, and what would the magic do? And so instead of trying to actually design things, trying to implement things, it's what would your pixie dust do? If you wanted to solve this problem that they're having, what would you want it to do? And so then we start creating those little pixie dusts. And we may say that soft aesthetics is our pixie dust, and calculate scan quality. I don't know how to calculate scan quality. All I know is that would solve the problem that they have, or I hypothesize that would solve the problem they have. They wouldn't need to return for a scan. And these sort of lead into how we get to the system capabilities. Because one of the things I've noticed, at least personally, is that there's a big difference between from the operational analysis side to the system side. And how do you bridge that? It's not always clear to me. And so I'm using this as a method to make that. So I'm looking at these different pains and gains that I've created, and looking at the functional ones. And if it's a functional one, then I want to sort of bring it back to a capability. So I've linked a couple of these to a capability called scan quality. And I can actually go in and create that capability, and I can start working on it at a system level of what do I want this to do, and create these functions inside of it, and sort of connect those to the pain relievers and gain creators. And then I can go back and really take update my storyboard. And in this one, though, it's not the storyboard for the operational processes, it's the storyboard for those capabilities. And so, what I had in the previous diagram was connect, contrast, display and overlay of the surgical site that we're looking, or the scan site that we're looking at. We need to position the patient. What we're really trying to do with this is produce something that we can take to a layperson and actually have them correct us. Did we get something wrong? That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get them to correct us. And so now we can go and do some solution interviews. And I like to sort of like reconfirm that they have these problems that we're looking for, and then do they think that the gain creators and pain relievers satisfy them? And if we take them through that updated storyboard, would that workflow be acceptable to them? Or would there be differences, or do they see problems with it that we can actually change now, early on? And what do they think of are the pros and cons of our solution? They may like some things, they might dislike those. That's really good information for us to do, because it allows us to actually prioritize what we're going to design and how we're going to do it. But really, the main thing it ends up being is, and especially in the medical, where there is a lot of different devices out there, and the hospital will have many different systems. And if they're experiencing the problems that you're trying to solve, would they use yours? Would they look at it and say, yeah, that would be something that I would really want? Or would it just be, I could grab something else and that's probably good enough? So you really want to be find out about this so that you can pivot early as possible. The ordering of these may change because of feedback that you got from the users and customers. But really what we're going to say is we've got problem solution fit when the customer feels that that's going to actually provide value to them. And so it's not us saying, we've got something and this is going to provide value to you. It's them coming back and saying, no, that's something that I would really want to use. And that is when you have that problem solution fit. And this allows us to write a value proposition. And we want to do one for each customer. And it's really just a simple statement of how we bring value. Before I do that, though, I'll just mention that there are some of these things that are non-functional. And sort of what I like to do is go in and put, create something there that those go to. So, the soft aesthetics will be connected to our industrial design. So going forward, we know when we do in the industrial design work that soft aesthetics is something that they value. And the wipeable contacts material really goes to material selection and an industrial design. So those are things that we're going to have to track going forward. And the value proposition we can write basically by our capabilities or services help whatever customer who wants to solve to do this job by alleviating these pains and providing these gains. So we could say our scan capability can help the operator who wants to do a scan by what was it? I have to go back a couple of slides, but by providing the overlay on a camera overlay of the scan region, and by providing an efficient workflow. And it's only now that I'll actually sit down and do the textual requirements. And this is really at the end. This is basically at the end of the concepts phase. Because prior to this, we actually didn't know what problems we were going to solve. And so we didn't really want to write down stakeholder requirements if we weren't actually sure what requirements we were going to solve. And we didn't want to write down system requirements because we didn't actually have an idea of what we were doing. So at this point, you can actually sit down and write your textual requirements. And then we can get into the solution architecture design. And, you know, this is, of course, the logical architecture and the physical architecture. So in some ways, the logical architecture will end in the system definition review. That's a sort of an understanding of what the overall high-level system is going to be. And PDR is a little bit different. And I'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. So we've got a logical architecture, and we're going to start developing that. And so we're going to do our normal functional decompositions and, you know, putting them into behavioral categories and work, doing our normal Capella work at that side. And then we're going to start looking at functional chains. And when we are doing these, we're doing them for an understanding of what do we want to test? And, you know, what are the learnings that we want now? We don't have a final architecture. This gives us a time before we finalize the architecture to actually understand, you know, what are the problems? Can I change them now and solve these problems? And so you can see I've got initiate a scan, which is just the operator connecting to a user interface. And then there is video capture, which goes from a video camera back to the operator, and an X-ray, which is from an initiate a scan all the way over to doing a quality check. So those are some of the, you know, potential functional chains that I would have, that I would want to test. And how do I do this? I do this by making small little architectures. So I branch off my large architecture, and I work with those little functional chains, and I design an architecture to test that, and only that. I don't want it to be a complete system. I want to, you know, do a video capture as a test. And you can do this because actually Capella supports Git and other version control systems. So you can actually branch stuff and you can merge them back. And this allows us to go into the physical architecture, but it's not the full physical architecture. You know, it's not this how the system will be developed and built. It is really how the learnings will be developed and built. So we're only going to focus in on that learning part of it still. And we're just going to build prototypes for learning. So these will be very simple prototypes if we can, you know, as quickly and as cheaply as possible. You know, instead of creating a nice display and having the users interact with it, we may just use Figma or something where we can use a prototyping tool to actually get those results very quickly without having large expenditures. If we needed a camera, we don't necessarily need the final camera. We need to have a camera sufficient enough that we can test our hypothesis. And so if positioning the patient using this overlay is our hypothesis, then what camera do we need? We don't need something that may need to be radiation proof, or we don't need a camera that will provide all of the functionalities that we want in the end. We just want something that will actually test that hypothesis. And so we can use potentially a small webcam. We can build stuff using, 3D prints and 80/20 instead of actually making, molds and generating final parts. So we want to actually push all of those risks onto now of, did we get the design right? At least in those little parts of it. And really what we're going for is a preliminary design review where not only do we have the functional architecture, but we've de-risked all of those functional chains. We haven't created a full integrated system yet, but we're really looking at those little pieces. Each of those little pieces, is there risk there? And if there is, let's test it. And so when we go into preliminary design review, we should have de-risked all of these sufficiently that we don't have any worry that we're not going to be able to actually succeed once we get into alpha build. And it's now that you can actually start to do your physical architecture, because now very unlikely that you're going to have to pivot, because you've actually done all of the pivoting already. It's already been done. And so now you can actually move into doing your physical architecture, which is part of the development phase, sort of spans between the PDR and the CDR. And, you can see that that's at 20 to 100 times more expensive. So if we've pushed off all of that stuff down into the concept and designs, then we're actually going to make it more likely that we will get a successful product in the end. And in conclusion, I've been using the lean startup techniques, and the real thing is it focuses in on the users and the other stakeholders, not trying to make the process as efficient as possible, but trying to learn as quickly as possible so that you can arrive at an effective architecture in the end. I've talked about how I've sort of integrated this into MBSE, into the Capella framework. Currently, it's done sort of the value proposition stuff and those other stuff I'm doing in Miro. But you could see that this could potentially become a viewpoint in the future where you could actually integrate these things inside of your model and actually update those in a traditional Capella sense. And that's the end of my slides, and I will take any questions.
Thank you very much, Brent. So we have a few questions. Let's go. The first of them is here. If you collect gains and pains only, how would you handle expectations? Things a customer expects and only becomes pain when they are not part of your concept?
Expectations is part of gains. So when, if you look back at the slide, there is expected gains. So those are what the user is expecting. And so those have to be sort of, managed inside of that.
Okay, thank you. And then Tobias again is wondering, how would you rate the role of the costs at that point in time? So I asked him to clarify which point in time he was talking about. Maybe you understand.
I would rate the goal of costs at what point in time? I'm not exactly sure what you're asking, Tobias, but those cost estimates are it's not project specific. Those are just sort of aggregate values that people have used over time to sort of understand how much a pivot would be. How would I use it? I'm trying not to use it. I'm trying to actually just force myself to, if I'm going to make a mistake and want to pivot, I want to do that as early as possible. So I want to do that really in the concept phase, but potentially also in the design phase. I want to do that before I get to PDR. And I definitely don't want to wait until it's out in the field when I find out that it's not it's not doing what I want it to do, or the user doesn't value what we've produced. Because that's really the thing, is we want to make sure that there is value to the user in the end.
Okay, understood. And our next question, are your customers always willing to share their pains?
Sometimes we actually have a human factors team that is much better than me at getting this information out of them. But really, yes, because this is something that they're if it's keeping them up at night, the larger the pain, the more they want to talk about it. If every time I have to do this, I have this problem, and it really is a big problem. They will talk about those pains. So it's sometimes, getting some of the gains, what they expect out of the system, is sometimes a bit harder, because they sometimes don't think of it. They already have it, so they don't actually think about it. But generally, the pains are a lot easier to get out of them.
Okay, thank you. And here is Gabriel Moreno trying to make a link with previous presentations. How do you tune the level of detail in each Capella model component to be sufficiently representative? I'll let you read the rest of the question.
I generally don't want to do a FEMECA on stuff that's built in concept or the design phases. What we're trying to do is learn, and later on we'll have to actually start to do that analysis. So as I was sort of saying, is I don't necessarily want to use I'm not looking to build the actual device at that point. I'm trying to build a part of that device so I can learn. So it's not trying to understand, all the failures that could go with this device. It's understanding where, how the device will in the end satisfy those values and come together.